Hey, so I forgot to add a few content warnings in this video, but in this video we'll be talking about drowning, acts of self-destruction, suicide, sex abuse, child sex abuse, death of a child, and murder, but it's murder of a pedophile, so there's that. If there's anything else I missed, I will add it to the screen in final production. Hey everyone, it's me, Alyssa. I also go by Lyss or Alsira, whichever's okay. This video, we're going to depth about the final poems of DETHROEZ. DETHROEZ is my second poetry book that was published earlier this year. It's available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. On this channel, I've uploaded a poetry reading for every poem in this collection, as well as uploading a video every now and then, analyzing each poem. There are separate videos for each poem, such as You Always Write Sad Songs and Wrath No Greater, because those were released as singles. Rainbow was released as a single, but I didn't have enough time or energy to give it its own video. Its own analysis video, I mean. Disclaimers. I have a bachelor's and master's in creative writing, as well as a minor in film and video studies. Additionally, I'm also a digital artist. I have self-published 2 poetry books, Kaleidoscope and DETHROEZ, both available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. These credentials do not make me an expert on the English language, English literature, or the craft of writing itself. Without further ado, let's get on with the video. I'll Find You. I would call this the angrier version of Daisy. If you recall, Daisy is about a butterfly dying in the meadow, and that being a metaphor for killing children and getting away with it. I'll Find You is more of a realistic, angrier version to that, where we see the speaker grieving for their child who was brutally assaulted by someone who seemingly got away with it. No one believes the guy is the attacker because he's such a charismatic guy. Then when he is finally arrested for the assault, everyone's in uproar. They want this guy freed out of jail. Then we have a court date. It looks like this guy might be let go due to the status and everything, until Your Honor was tapped by a phone call. This phone call, recorded from the jail, details this guy saying that he will get out, insults his followers and the justice system, and relishes in his crimes. Overnight, the crowd goes from freeing him to kill him, and a death sentence he eventually got. There were several true events that inspired this poem, just like in Daisy and a lot of other poems that I've written. It's very true that there are people who get away with heinous crimes and we hate to see it, but there are times where it's either justice or karma that gets them. As expressed in the final stanzas, killing the attacker doesn't completely heal the wound, but it does set a precedent, a standard on how such people should be treated. The part about the jail call was from a true story where a white teenager, I believe he was 19 or so, was arrested for some crime. I think it was like a DUI or something. I'll put in an update when I get the story, and he put up such a sob story, it looked like he was about to get released, until the judge revealed a jail call that this adult made about he was going to cry and gain the judge's sympathy and get out. Unfortunately for that adult, he did not get out of jail. And for the will-like attacker in I'll Find You, his demise was very much inspired by a certain musician with an infamous past. That musician was Ian Watkins, formerly of Lost Prophets. At the time of writing this poem, he was very well alive, and I, along with other people, very much wanted him dead due to his heinous crimes. There was a reputation carried with inmates like Watkins, as child sex abusers don't last long in prison. However, this didn't seem to be the case for Watkins. He was killed because he owed a debt to someone. To be honest, it seemed like the inmates didn't give a shit if Watkins was a predator or not. As for the attacker in I'll Find You, his demise was a single headline on a joyous day during summer. Nobody gave a shit about him anymore. Pretty much, I'll Find You and Daisy were two sides of the same coin, just one was more angrier than the other. I debated which poem to keep in this collection because I didn't want to run into the same problem I had with Kaleidoscope, where I had 3 poems that were about heartbreak, but the situations were different. The reason why I eventually kept both poems in this collection was due to the fact that they presented different levels of intensity. The way I organized these poems in DETHROEZ is similar to how it was done in Kaleidoscope. We started off light and end off big. Anchor. This was one of those poems where it took some time for me to figure out what this poem was really about. Ultimately, it was about pressure, how it can crush someone like an ocean. Another way to look at this poem is self-punishment, which is expressed towards the end, and it's a revelation for the speaker. When I first wrote this poem, it was a puzzle for me because not every line was concrete or direct. What it was direct about was calamity, personal calamity, conflict, and the feeling of never being enough. Every stanza includes the word anchor, which can be annoying, but that was a quote-unquote rule I instilled in this poem. Not sure if I'll write another poem like this where every stanza has the same word. I'm sort of confusing this poem with Subliminal Rage because they do follow the same strain of thought, just in a different way. I do recall 2 songs from Spirit Box that help with this poem. Soak in the Strings and Yellow Jacket. There's something about writing while listening to music that sometimes you end up writing to that melody, but also ends up original. Also, the way it's spoken out loud changes the way the poem is written or presented. This is one of several examples. I include the bird, the albatross, because they are the largest birds in the world. They can fly for decades, and they are known to be chill with humans due to having no enemies. A reason why I added the albatross is because I took a course called British Literature in undergrad, and the albatross was a rather iconic symbol in some authors' writing. So I included it. I also liked how I used the phoenix in ocean metaphor. If you didn't know, a phoenix is a mythical bird of fire that has risen from the ashes. The ending of this poem, Anchor, segues us into the next poem, mostly because I could never find the right ending for a poem, and it made sense to turn the anchor into a sword, which leads us to Moonblessed. Moonblessed. This was an idea that was floating around in my head for a while. I do love space. This was expressed in Kaleidoscope. The moon is one of my favorite celestial beings, and the moon is a very common theme and motif in many works, so why not add to it? The moon is what the speaker is praying to. I don't know what religion the speaker is. Doesn't have to be in a religion to pray. Some people are just spiritual without a label. That's so fine. The format of this poem is similar to a poem from my previous collection called Kaleidoscope. That poem was Earth is Dying. I was very dramatic in that one. It was about, the end of the world, really. And this poem, Moonblessed, is in a similar way. The speaker seeks strength and wisdom with their new sword against the world, and anyone who tries to violate them. Is that too much to ask for? We also talk about how the moon shows us its scars and bruises, beatings taken from asteroids and other celestial events, and how everyone's in awe of this, yet the speaker is criticized for things out of their control. I think we've all experienced this: body shaming, body image issues, body dysmorphia, eating disorders, and chronic illnesses. People criticize things like we can change overnight, or like we're products on display. Now, you are allowed to have your opinion, but think about your words and their effect before you express them. The amount of times my weight and body shape have been a topic of discussion among strangers, and you think I'm either presenting myself in a sexual way or fixing myself? How about I'm just trying to fucking live without being harassed or attacked? I do plan on writing more poems involving celestial beings. And celestial beings are planets, stars, moons, etc. in space. I do use these in a few poems in this collection, and a lot more prevalent in my previous collection. Mayonnaise, I believe, uses planets in an abstract way. I mentioned the red dot, which is Mars, and the morning star, which is Venus. I know Venus isn't a star, but back then, astronomers and people thought Venus was a star that appeared in the morning. The reason why is because Venus's atmosphere had so much clouds that reflected off the sunlight. That's all for my astronomy lesson. I am not an astronomer, I just like space. Now that our sword has been sharpened and blessed by the moon, let's see how it reacts to love. Swords crossed heart. Now, this wasn't an exact sequel to Moonblessed as many of my other poems were. Think of it as a spiritual sequel, a segue into other poems, a helpful way of organizing poems. Sword-Crossed Heart is my attempt at writing enemies to lovers. Now you know, I'm not a fan of romance. I tend to roll my eyes at relationships that are too hot to handle, like Get a Room already. I stray away from books that have a spice meter. I usually go for books that have a low spice meter if it's affordable. What I didn't realize is that even though I don't like romance or writing romantic plots, I do write about love in my poems. It's just easier to express that way for me. I'm not saying it's for everyone. I'm writing a romantic subplot in one of my novel projects, and there will be poems that refer to romance in my next poetry projects. Anyways, I've always wanted to attempt writing an enemies to lovers story. To me, I've always envisioned this as a sitcom version, like in Parks and Rec, how Leslie and Ben fall in love, etc. This poem is a little more cringe, especially from the perspective of a general's son. He's not used to war, but he's in it anyways. He's naive, which is how he fell so easily in love with another soldier, who he assumes is to be on his side. Little did he know, he spills his secret and heart to the enemy leader. He and his troops are kidnapped, and he meets with the leader. And the son believes that a death must happen to end this aging war, and he offers himself to be sacrificed. Enemy leader's like, okay, well, I like you, so let's not kill you. They end up getting married with the approval of the general and end the war. It's very simplified, very rough at a first attempt. I don't think we need to go in detail about the romance. And this poem was not meant to, solve and be like a solution for any real life world conflicts. I kept it vague enough for anyone who reads this to visualize or ponder. DETHROEZ, last but not least, the poem of the hour, the poem this collection was named after, DETHROEZ. I'll get into why DETHROEZ is spelled that way and where it came from. Let's dive into the poem first. It's a calling, a warning, a sign that the end is pretty much here. DETHROEZ is a revenge on the world that seems to have forgotten about their humanity, so the apocalypse is here to wipe them out and start anew. DETHROEZ is a blackened rose that is dying, wishes to be buried in her own hometown, the very town that casted her out. Why? We don't know why she was casted out, but we do know that this town is one of those fear-mongering, God-fearing towns like Salem, Massachusetts, back during the witch trials. In fact, I mentioned one of the other towns where witch trials took place, Andover. No, that was not a mistake. I mentioned many an anecdote about how women were villainized for things that are out of their control, for rejecting others, or for just being themselves. I talk about the Middle Passage, which is referring to the Atlantic slave trade, where millions of Africans were enslaved and trafficked to the Americas. I'm going to give a little historical piece. I'm not a historian. If I get anything wrong in this section, please correct me in the comments down below. We are respectful, not assholes. After slavery was abolished in the UK, which is United Kingdom, whose merchants were transporting many of these enslaved Africans, labor still needed to be used. So the merchants turned to India and China and other Asian countries but we're going to focus on India for now. Indians were being contracted, which is very different than chattel slavery. These contracts included a salary, which didn't amount to much, especially in today's money. So Indians were being transported to the Caribbean to work on a sugar plantation. Eventually, indentured servitude was abolished as well. The reason why I mention this is not only because of the domino effect of colonization and exploited labor, but also that some of my ancestors were on those ships, so my history stemmed from there. I don't know where exactly my ancestors came from, which country that is now, but I do know my history is important to remember. Moving on, I had a bit of an iffy issue calling out religious zealots because I didn't feel it was my place to talk about this, especially about communities that I'm not a part of. I will always criticize the way religion is weaponized nowadays and zealots and all, but I will never demonize someone for being religious. Some bands that helped me with the rage and attitude of this poem and other poems in this collection were Fit for a King, Icon for Hire, Poppy, and Spirit Box. I won't go into history of every band. That's where you have access to the internet. This poem was written in parts and were meant for different poems, but when I read them all, it felt like they would be part of one poem, and that was DETHROEZ. We start off with rage, and the end off with solace, putting our rage to rest. It's not healthy to keep hate in our hearts, unless the person or subject that brought on that rage is still around and has yet to face consequences. I grew up in a multi-religious household. My mom is Muslim and my dad is Hindu. I also went to a Catholic school for 1 year, and no, it did not benefit me in any way. Children are very cruel, especially before the crucifix. I'm just glad that school is closed now, and the ones who bullied me got what they deserved. The ending is sort of a farewell note and a love song to a part of the past that helped shape me. I won't go into detail. I keep it vague enough for anyone to relate or fill in the blanks. This poem defines the entire attitude and theme of DETHROEZ. Now, why was DETHROEZ written like that? Could I just say DETHROEZ? I'll give the story. When I was writing Kaleidoscope, I was starting to get into more heavy music like Fit for a King or Wage War. Fit for a King has an album and song called Death Grip, which I love and still love to this day. I do love how they still kept the theme of the rose throughout their other albums. Now, the song Death Grip inspired the words DETHROEZ, and my mind works differently, so I wrote it as DETHROEZ with cryptic writing. I think it was more meant to be a placeholder, but I liked how unique it was, so I kept it as the final title. It is pronounced as DETHROEZ, which is included in the description and author's note. Death was originally going to be a poem about the apocalypse and religious extremism. It is still about that, however, I expanded on the topic and it turned into a 30-plus poem collection. This was a bit of a love story to myself, as I was someone who grew up with pent-up rage and trauma. I look back at myself those previous years and say, I forgive you, it wasn't your fault. But you did hurt people, and that's no excuse. I've seen how grief affects people, and it's hard for those who grieve to apologize how they treated others, especially their own family. I won't go into detail about that. It was fucking terrible. And the next year was the COVID lockdown. Hey, there's one more thing that I wanted to add before we reach the end. This is a recurring theme in a number of my poems and expressed in different ways. But it is the theme of the villainization of women and femicide, which is the act of killing a woman because she is a woman, or she deviates from the norm of being a woman, something like that. And you could say, and also of course misogyny is in there. That's a big theme as well. This collection, DETHROEZ, is more of like a female rage version of Kaleidoscope. And I compare this to how Spirit Box, one of my favorite bands, they have 2 albums, Eternal Blue and Tsunami Sea, and the vocalist, Courtney, she refers to Tsunami Sea as Eternal Blue's my darker sibling, which I would also say applies to my 2 collections. As per my 3rd collection, which is still in progress, it's more of existential transformation of energy, neither created nor destroyed kind of thing. I'm still working out the kinks. As for my next project, as I said before, I'm working on my debut novel and a 3rd poetry project. My goal for this month really, is to finish the first draft of my novel for the year ends. I'm about 75% through. I can't really put an exact percentage on it. It's a wild ride, as most 3rd acts are, or the 5th act if you're a book by Tamsin Mura. I'll give you all an update when the first draft is done, possibly in late December or early January, who knows. My 3rd poetry book, I don't have a deadline for yet. When I wrote Kaleidoscope, I had the idea of having DETHROEZ published 2 years after in 2024. That ended up being published in 2025, and that's totally okay. I have a lot of poems in this project so far, and I'm still figuring out the format and themes and all. With the first 2 books, it's rather easy, as I knew what I wanted the tone and theme to be about. For the 3rd book, it's fluid, a bit too fluid. Can't solidify much, but in the coming years we'll come together and I'll have a more concrete plan. It's not like I'm planning out the health insurance crisis. I do have other projects on the back burner, a lot of back burners. But I'm getting through one by one. It's how we do what we do. I'm starting to use Substack. Now I've added a paid option. It's only $5 a month, $60 a year. Not too bad. Those paid posts will be more in-depth updates on my latest projects, even some snippets and some sneak peeks. I also have a Discord server, which is a bit of a ghost town, but hey, we're still active. I do want to start live streaming here on YouTube. I am a broke indie author currently living with my parents. Finding a job is not easy despite having the education I have. Support me any way you can through my affiliate links or buy my books via Amazon, Barnes & Noble. All links can be found via my link tree in the description down below. Make sure to hydrate and be safe. Bye!